All right, snatch grip deadlifts for folks who don't necessarily weightlift, but they still want to program this movement. So step one is going to be getting your stance. So generally speaking, just outside of hip width is usually a good spot for most folks. You might find that you're more comfortable narrow. You might find that you're a little bit more comfortable wide. I like to go right outside hip width. For our grip, generally speaking, if you are like a 6 foot tall guy or taller, you'll probably be at the end of the knurling. I'm about 6 foot, but I like to come in a little bit. So you'll want to play with your positioning. If you do snatches already and program them often, just use your normal snatch grip. Again though, this is a movement tutorial for folks who don't necessarily snatch all the time, and they might not be that well versed with a snatch. But when we get set here, we're gonna take our normal stance. We want to think when we get down into our positioning, as opposed to a normal deadlift where our hips will be higher, our hips will be a little bit lower, and we're pulling that chest tall and getting tight with the lats. So when we lift, we are coming into this like nice, tall, strong position. So as opposed to a deadlift again where we have our hips higher, we're gonna be a little bit lower here. We want to pull that bar tight to the shins, and we come up. That should allow us to naturally clear our knees too. So now that you have your stance and grip, let's talk about pulling the slack out of the bar and the actual initial lifting, which is gonna be step two. All right, so step two revolves around pulling the slack out of the bar and the actual lifting, so the concentric part of the movement. So what do I mean by pulling the slack out of the bar? Essentially, when we're set up, if I was in my positioning here and you were to push me around, I don't want to see you be able to fall off and on the barbell. So for example, if I was loose, you could push me, I might fall back, I might fall forward. If you have the slack out of the bar, there's gonna be tension coming through the floor, through your body, and through that barbell to keep you in a nice set and stacked position, AKA just a nice pre-lifting position. We're basically priming our nervous system for the lifting of the movement. So when we pull the slack out, a good cue is to think about getting tight with those lats and then loading the hips. If you're loose in your hips, you can tell pretty easily because your shins won't be close to the barbell. So as a good rule of thumb, if your shins are close to the bar, you should be pretty solid. Now, when you are standing up with that weight, you're gonna think, get tight for the movement. So your brace will reflect the load. So for heavier lifts, you might need a bigger brace. And for lighter lifts, you could probably get away with having a light tension throughout. This is a pretty light weight, so I can still obviously talk through this movement as I go, but that doesn't mean I'm not creating tension. As you can see, the barbell is still staying tight to my body and not floating away. I don't look loose in my lifting. I'm not flexing the torso. So step two, again, pull the slack out, lift. Step three is gonna be the eccentric, the lowering of the barbell. All right, so step three is where we get a lot of bang for our buck with this movement, and why I honestly love doing blocks here and there with snatch grip deadlifts. So we are going to set, pull the tension out, big chest. Now at the top here, we're gonna wanna hinge, stay over that bar. As that bar begins to pass, think that knee range, that bottom, that's when you're gonna start getting back into knee flexion. So over the bar, and then you're gonna come down and get back into that deeper knee flexion, into that set position. So let's go through a couple of reps just so you can see it. And then boom, bending the knees. So ideally, you want this barbell to land in the same position it started in. So there's not much variance. So for example, I'm not having to reset my feet every single rep. And there's a good simple tip that I like to use for lifters, especially newer lifters, as I'm sweating everywhere, for this movement to really dial that in. Because with beginners, there's two things I'll generally see. There'll be either too much break at the top, so that'll push that bar out, or it'll be almost such an exaggerated hinge that there's never really any knee flexion as they get set. So they'll come back down with a deep hinge and then go to pull and keep those hips high. And that's generally when you'll see lifters who are doing these 4 reps get super fatigued in the lower back. Because if you're hinging here and then just going through, you're gonna get way more tired in the lower back. But that said, let's talk about the tip that I like to use for newer lifters, especially folks like Katie, who literally just did this movement today or learned it today. This is our first day ever doing them. All right, so the tip, if you are getting that barbell away from you, or if it's not landing in a nice consistent spot, your reps feel piecey, this is one of my favorite things to do, and you could do this on your own with 2 foam rollers. I'm just gonna stand here with the dowels to show you for video, but Katie is not a weightlifter. She has never done a barbell snatch in her life, have you? No. So this is her first day snatch grip deadlifting, and so one of the cues we've been working on to make sure she sequences her hips at the top and staying over that barbell with her knees, because she obviously has never done a snatch to feel what that feels like, we're using this to focus on her bar path. So with movements like deadlifts and snatch grip deadlifts, this will work on both of those movements when you're trying to work on bar path. A big thing that I like to say is don't be so dogmatic and rigid with it to where you're super tight and you're not allowing any variance. Every lifter who moves differently at different anatomies, you might see a teeny bit of variance in bar path. So what I'll generally do is I'll go about 6 inches with foam rollers or dowels, sometimes a little bit less if you're really trying to get dialed, but give yourself a little bit of room. So think 1 to 2 inches on each side of the bar. As you do this, Katie, let's go ahead and go through your reps. What we want to focus on, Katie, is not bonking these dowels. If we're bonking this dowel, you might be coming too forward. If you're bonking this dowel, you might be sitting back way too far. Nice, keep that bar close to the body. A little bit tighter at the bottom, so pull that bar in, big chest, head up. Yep, nice. Bar a little bit tighter to the body. At the top, good, you're gonna wanna hinge back, stay over the bar, knee, yep, beautiful. Awesome. Got one more? Nice, Katie. And so one thing I am noticing is it's getting a little bit far away from you in your knee to hip range of motion. Totally normal, we'll work on it. But the fact that you're landing in a consistent position, that's a really good sign that you're sequencing correctly. Now we can just keep getting a little bit more fine-tuned, but overall, nice job. All right, so I want to cover a few more talking points before we wrap this video up. Number one, I want to go back to grip and just talk on it really fast. So if you're trying to do a crash course on your grip, take a barbell or a dowel and hold it overhead, and what you get a full, basically think surface area of your hand grabbing, that's usually a good starting point for your snatch grip deadlifts. Now again, I am not going to be your weightlifting resource. If you want to dial in your grip for snatch, there are a ton of great resources out there. I like Dylan Cooper, he's one of my boys. I always watch his stuff because I learn little nuggets of information every time I do. But all that to say, if you're already snatching, again, just use your snatch grip and use that for your deadlifts as well. Don't overcomplicate it. That's mostly for beginners. Now another cue I want to talk about is when you are getting heavier with the weight, something you're going to want to do is shoot those hips up naturally. You're gonna feel stronger in that position, or at least the body will think it will. So what you want to do as you are getting heavier and you're acclimating to your snatch grip deadlifts is you wanna think about, I almost say program a 2 to 3 concentric tempo. So 1, 2, 3. And what that's gonna do is it's generally going to slow you down so you can't physically lift your hips up and shoot them up. I'll do this often for lifters who are struggling with heavy deadlifts too, especially as fatigue sets in and we are getting them used to moving heavier weights. Another cue I want to talk about is when you are programming these, when you want to play with different positions for different adaptations, I think it's incredibly healthy to do so. So what I mean by that is, for example, if I was doing, let's say, a block of snatch grip deadlifts to where I wanted to be a little bit more posterior focused, there is nothing wrong with starting with slightly higher hips. So think hips a little bit higher, coming through and finishing, and then coming back with a higher hip position. It's almost like a snatch grip RDL, but we're obviously going back to a ground position. So there will be a little bit more flex in the knees compared to a true snatch grip RDL. Another thing is if you want a little bit more leg, thing that I like to think about is find your big toe. That's gonna get your VMO more involved, and you're gonna want deeper knee flexion. So when you're getting set, if you want more of like a full lower body stimulus from this movement, more knee flexion, find that big toe, and then you will get a little bit more quad. So again, if you wanna program and be a bit more posterior focused, slightly higher hips, lower knees, lower hips for more knees. But that said, the only last cue I want to talk about too before we wrap this video up is breathing. So when you are getting set in your reps, at the bottom here, you're gonna brace, pull the slack out. At the top, that is when you can breathe, or what you want to do is hold and then exhale on the way down. I personally like to breathe a little bit more throughout the eccentric if I can. If I'm too heavy to where I have to maintain max tension, then I will hold my breath a little bit longer and release slowly. But if you are working through a WOD, for example, and you're doing multiple reps, it can be really useful to figure out your breathing pattern for different stimulus to give you a little bit more bang for your buck regarding oxygen and just how you're getting that throughout your sets. But all that said, that wraps up this crash course guide for snatch, grip, deadlifts. If you have additional questions in the comments, let me know. This is one of my favorite movements that honestly I don't program enough, and being here teaching Katie today made me want to make this video. But that said, drop a comment down below if you need some help. See you guys in the next one. Peace.